So as we continue our discussion on DC Rebirth, we pick up now with Justice League Rebirth, A State of Fear. Now, to be honest with you guys, I'm not really sure what direction Bryan Hitch was going with this. The only thing I can deduce is that because of the way this story arc ends, that he was looking to create a shakeup in the roster of the Justice League, which kind of makes sense. Maybe it was something along the lines of what was going on with Sam Humphrey's Green Lanterns, but it seems as though, the Justice League is maybe going to substitute a new member or simply just leave their roster the way it is by the time the story ends. I'm not entirely sure, but what this does is this picks up with the Justice League absolutely terrified for their lives. Now, we're not told what it is that they're afraid of here. We're not told, or at least what it is that, what's invoking this fear. All we know is that something seems to be speaking out regarding fear, and it's absolutely terrifying them. Now, with regards to the Justice League, they're not scared of whatever this entity is. They're scared of their own fears. They're scared of what it is in their lives that affects them personally. And this is really interesting because with the character of Jessica Cruz, fear has always been a major focal point of her character. When she was first created by Jeff Johns, when she was first introduced, and over the course of her publication history, it's always been the idea that she was afraid of the world. She was afraid of everything out there. When she was elected to become Power Ring, and she was under the influence of Volthoom from Earth 3, fear was a major part of her. She never really believed that she had the courage, to act in the face of almost guaranteed death. With regards to her time on the Justice League as a Green Lantern, it was the same thing, that she always never really saw a reason for why she was a Green Lantern. But what's also interesting about this is that initially in this conflict, because of the fact that Green Lanterns have to overcome their fear in order to be Green Lanterns, that Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz seem to be the only two left. Now, we're actually going to find out that things aren't necessarily as clear-cut as they seem to be here, but the indication from Bryan Hitch is that because the Green Lanterns confront their own fears and overcome their own fears in order to combat the Sinestro Corps especially, that, Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz are the only two people here that can thwart this threat. And this is actually what happens. As this fear begins to overcome them, they use their combined efforts as Green Lanterns, they overcome this fear, and they basically destroy it. Now again, whether Bryan Hitch is trying to use this as like a metaphor for something else, I don't know. Really, I have no clue where the story came from or why it was even written in the first place. But because of the fact that they're able to pull the willpower of members of the Justice League together, and because they're able to use their combined, character strength in order to destroy this fear, that everything seems to be right in the world now. One of the other interesting things about this, though, is that Bryan Hitch kind of builds off the idea of the Justice League just fighting an enemy. There are some cases when we pick up with superhero stories where right when the story starts, they finish fighting an enemy. Not because that enemy is relevant, but because of the fact that it just shows us, here's what they were doing while they were off panel. And that seemed to be the indication with this, at least that was my thought, was Bryan Hitch is just kind of showing us, well, here's just what the Justice League was doing, while they were in between the events of Extinction Machine and the start of this storyline. But the issue with this is that, again, Bryan Hitch, I'm not really sure where we're going, but another cool concept, and this is something that I actually really liked, is Barry Allen and Jessica Cruz. Now, my thought was that with DC Rebirth, because Rebirth exists for the purpose of taking what worked before the New 52 and combining it with what works in the New 52, that we would see Barry Allen in a relationship with Iris West, because that was really a main focal point of his character before, the events of the New 52. It was Barry Allen, or at least when he was alive anyway, it was Barry Allen and it was Iris West, even really it was before Crisis on Infinite Earths, to be honest. It was Barry and Iris, and I had always thought that we were going to see a return to their relationship because it always just seemed natural. It always seemed appropriate that Barry Allen and Iris West were together. They're the DC power couple alongside Superman and Lois Lane, alongside, Marvel's Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson, or Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy if you're a really old, Marvel comic fan. But the fact remains here that, with this situation, instead, Bryan Hitch changes things up and he actually has Jessica Cruz ask Barry Allen out on a date. Now, to be honest with you guys, I never really saw an instance where Jessica Cruz and Barry Allen would get together. I guess it works, but it's just weird to me, right? We never would have seen Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz get together. That we know that never would have happened. But I always thought that Jessica Cruz would get together with someone who was not a member of the Justice League, like just some random person, like Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor, for example, or something along those lines. It would just be a random guy that she met somewhere and just, the two of them just kind of hit it off and they started dating. I never really saw her getting together with Barry Allen, but it works. It actually works really well. The chemistry between the two, they really bounce off each other. And the reason why I say that is for Jessica Cruz, because fear is such a huge part of her life in terms of her backstory, when she's going through the process of trying to figure out what to wear, she goes through the first date jitters, so she's trying to figure out what to wear. She's worried about, well, what if Barry Allen doesn't like her when they sit down? What if it turns out to be the most disastrous date ever and they can't be friends anymore? And then she has to leave the Justice League because the two of them just can't hit it off. What happens with that whole situation? Not only that, for Barry Allen, it's much the same way. He gets the first date jitters. He goes home, he takes a shower after, dealing with different criminals, and then it's the same thing. Well, maybe, he feels like he's overdressed. You know, he feels like, you know, he might come on too strong. He wants to get her flowers, different things like this. And so ultimately the two of them just kind of meet up and they're both dressed casually. Now again, this is just a normal part of dating. You know, everybody gets the nervous jitters when it comes to the first dates. And what's also kind of funny is Bryan Hitch also keeps a little things intact, which I think is kind of cool. You know, that when Barry Allen goes to get her flowers, because of the fact that he was running, he basically ran all the petals off the flowers. So all he gives her is a bouquet of stems, which again is kind of cute here. But in any event, we end up picking back up with Batman, and Batman is basically just sort of sitting around. He tries to contact Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson doesn't answer, and when Alfred asks him if everything's okay, he says he wants to be left alone. Now, the reason why this matters is because this is very uncharacteristic of Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne does not usually let the world know, or really let anybody know, how he feels on an emotional level. He's very guarded in that respect. Even with members of the Bat family, the closest members, the ones that he's been alongside of the longest. You know, when it comes to Dick Grayson, the longest person that's been alongside his life is part of the Bat family. You know, Tim Drake, even Red Hood, Jason Todd, you know, for them, it is, they always see him as a member of the team, but it's never like a father-son relationship in the true sense. It's always a mentor and a student relationship. That's the way it always is. But to see Bruce Wayne, you know, show his emotions, even if he doesn't speak it, to basically show that he just wanted to reach out to Dick Grayson and see how he was doing, tells us volumes about the fact that something's going on that's affecting Bruce Wayne on a personal level. Now, from here, we jump back to Jessica Cruz and to Barry Allen. And this is again Bryan Hitch telling us that there's something going on under the current here. Of course, there are a couple funny moments, you know, when Barry Allen orders a ton of food because as the Flash, he has to eat so much stuff. But as soon as he goes to touch the hand of Jessica Cruz, she freaks out. She absolutely loses her mind and just flies into a state of hysterics and is completely overcome by fear. And what Bryan Hitch is telling us here is that this sense of fear that the members of the Justice League were experiencing at the beginning of the story has not gone away. That for some reason they're being infected by absolute terror, that the worst fears of them at the particular moment in time are coming to fruition. And so Jessica Cruz does exactly what she did when she, you know, saw her friends murdered during her introduction, and she runs into a safe room and she just refuses to leave. And so what we do is we jump to Superman, and we have Superman speaking with Lois Lane. Now, what he says is that he basically has a headache, you know, that for whatever reason his head's bothering him. But you know, the more he talks to Lois Lane, the more he reveals that he's angry. You know, when she initially brings up the fact that Superman's trying to earn the trust of Batman, he initially lashes out and says, don't talk about him, you know, and then the two of them get into somewhat of an argument in the sense that he says, you know, Superman makes a case that he's tried to save the world so many times, he's tried to earn Batman's trust so many times, and Batman still won't trust him. And so ultimately he says the only thing left for him to do is to go find Bruce Wayne and to kill him. And so what this does is this, of course, inevitably leads to a conflict between Batman and Superman. Now, for those of us who have been reading DC Comics, or really if you've been reading for any measure of time, especially with the New 52, there's a general rule of thumb when it comes to reboots, or it comes to soft reboots or rehashing of character story arcs. If in any situation Batman and Superman or any variation of their characters have met for the first time, they will fight. If it's an Elseworld story like The Dark Knight Returns, you know, they fight in that story. That really set the stage for Batman versus Superman, the two of them fighting one another. When the New 52 first started, they fought one another. In Elseworld stories, when they meet for the very first time, they fight each other. It's just a general rule, and this is no different. Because DC Rebirth effectively sees the crossover of the pre-New 52 Superman into the New 52 landscape in order to take the place of the New 52 Superman who's now dead, this is effectively, you know, at least what seems to be the first time these two are meeting. Now, something to keep in mind here is that Bruce Wayne does not know about what's going on with the larger story arc and the fact that, you know, 10 years were taken from their lives, so on and so forth. He doesn't know all that stuff. You know, for him, it's just, this is a new Superman. And so it still allows for Bryan Hitch to create a scenario where the two of them fight one another. Not only that, whenever you have a story where Batman and Superman fight, it always just does well. Everybody just loves seeing Batman and Superman fight one another. And this is exactly what happens. Superman shows up in the Batcave, you know, after breaking through a wall or smashing through a wall, and tells Bruce Wayne, look, I've done every single thing that you've asked. You know, I've traveled to the core of the earth, which we saw him do during Extinction Machine. You know, he says, I was willing to give up my family. If I had died in the process, then that would have been it. No one would have been there to take care of Jonathan and Lois Lane. He says, I was willing to put my life on the line for the sake of following your orders, trusting you, and saving the world, and you still don't trust me. You know, what does it take? And so at this point, Superman is in truth just ready to kill Batman. But this is again because he's being pushed towards the direction of fear. Now from here, we jump to Wonder Woman and Aquaman. And with Wonder Woman and Aquaman, you know, they're basically, again, because they're friends, you know, she's helping him with the task of pulling, you know, a giant tanker out of the ocean. And the more Aquaman and Wonder Woman start to talk, the more they begin to say things like they're getting irritated with humanity. You know, Aquaman Superman says that humanity is constantly poisoning the waters of the oceans, of his domain with, toxins and with ships and so on and so forth. And Wonder Woman says that she was sent outside of Amazon for a mission of peace. She was sent outside into the realm of men in order to bring peace to the world. But she says that people are just inherently violent. And it seems that from her perspective, the only way to solve this problem is to just kill everyone, or at least take over the world. That way people will live in peace, whether they want to or not. That they'll live in peace with a gun pointed to their head, basically. And so this trend continues following this. Bryan Hitch continues to take us on this journey where you have Cyborg, who talks about how he believes that he's deformed, that he's screwed up. He doesn't like people seeing him for what he is. He's paranoid of the fact that everybody's looking at him. For Simon Baz, he just wants to be left alone, that he doesn't think anybody will accept him. He doesn't think the Justice League likes him. He feels isolated. And so again, Bryan Hitch is just bouncing back and forth. Batman and Superman are in the conflict of fighting one another, but their battle is very, very quick. And the reason why is because for Bruce Wayne, his intellect, his intelligence is at the top of the list, when it comes to some of the most intelligent people in DC Comics. And for him, he knows enough about himself. He knows that if he allowed his guilt to override him, that it would drive him insane, that he would not be able to be an adequate superhero. And so the fact that his guilt is at the surface, because of the fact that he now feels bad, or I guess, he's allowing his guilt to play more of a role in his life, in terms of it controlling him, regarding the death of Jason Todd by, at the hands of the Joker, the death of his parents at the hands of Joe Chill, indicates to Bruce Wayne that somebody or something is manipulating him, that something's happening whereby their fear is allowing to take control. And so once Superman comes to this realization too, the question they have is, what happens next? Now, with regards to this continued journey of Jessica Cruz, again, Bryan Hitch really plays on her character. And if I can be honest with you guys, I love the idea of Jessica Cruz, but I really feel like it's time to let go of this fear element and move into something else, because this really seems to be the backbone. Almost every single story that we see with her character, it's always, I'm never going to be a good Green Lantern. No one ever trusts me. I can never be a real superhero. Why am I a Green Lantern? It's always the same thing. And granted, it's great for creating a good dichotomy between who she is as a Green Lantern and who she used to be. And it's great for providing a weakness to her if she were to go against like the Sinestro Corps. But the fact remains here that I think it's time to start moving beyond the fact that Jessica Cruz is just afraid of everything and start focusing on making her a more empowered character. But Bryan Hitch follows this trend of focusing on her fear. Granted, this story is designed to focus on fear, so it makes sense, but the idea is that for both Barry Allen and for Jessica Cruz, that their fear is totally overcoming of them. Barry Allen initially tries to talk her out of it. He tries to reason with her, but again, Jessica Cruz is totally succumbed by it. Not only that, she begins to vomit up what looks like this fear substance or liquid or something like that, and it seems to incapacitate Barry Allen. So while this is happening, again, we get this sort of disembodied voice talking about how all these members of the Justice League are succumbing to their fear. All these members of the Justice League are weak at their core, and that, whatever this entity is going to take over the Justice League, and in turn, seems like it's going to lay waste to the planet as a whole. And so what happens is this massive embodiment of fear begins to make its way throughout the entirety of New York. And Batman and Superman begin to, again, have this conversation on what's going on. Bruce Wayne and Superman sort of sit down and have this discussion. They essentially say, or at least Bruce Wayne just comes out and says, look, I can't always trust you. It's just, I don't work that way. More so than that, he says that we're not the exact same kind of people. You come from a family of hope. Your family was dying and your parents sent you away from a dying planet believing that you could live out. It was the hope that he would survive and continue on the legacy of their race, even if it meant they couldn't continue their race through procreation. At the same time, Batman is a family of tragedy. His parents were murdered senselessly. There was no real reason behind it. And so it wasn't some grandiose scheme. It wasn't leading to something incredibly beautiful and great like Superman. Instead, it was just Batman doing what he could with the hand that he was dealt, and ultimately, allowing Bruce Wayne to step into the Batman mantle. And so he says they're not the same kind of people. They come from two different worlds. The reason behind their existence is totally separate. But for Superman, he says that doesn't matter. That the two of them needed to learn to accept each other. They have to trust one another because it's the only way that they can fight adequately as superheroes. And so what happens is that ultimately this all really just comes down to Jessica Cruz. I thought it was going to come down to some great big huge grandiose conflict. I thought it was going to be another battle with the Justice League, but that doesn't happen. Instead, it really just seems like Bryan Hitch was focusing a lot on the characters. Batman and Superman coming to grips with one another on who they are. Cyborg coming to grips with his own fear. Simon Baz coming to grips with who he is as a person and where he belongs. This story is great for character development, but the reason why I say it kind of felt like it was out of nowhere is because suddenly they're afraid and then they're not. And Jessica Cruz, of course, uses the power of her lantern ring to destroy that concept of fear. But it was good for what it was in terms of us having a better understanding of the characters. But beyond that, it seemed a little strange. And so ultimately, I guess as this story begins to wrap up, Jessica Cruz basically says that she's going to carry on to be a Green Lantern. She's gonna continue that role, but she doesn't know if she wants to be in the Justice League anymore. The reason why she says that is because as she felt this entity go through her, as she felt this creature go through her, that they gave her a sense of an idea that she's just not ready for that yet. She's simply just not ready to be a member of a team as significant as the Justice League. Now, this is Bryan Hitch telling us just how important the Justice League is. The Justice League is not the Titans. The Justice League is not the Teen Titans. The Justice League is not, Justice League International or something like that. It's not Doom Patrol. It's none of that stuff. The Justice League is the premier team of DC Comics, the premier protectors of the planet Earth. When all else fails, the Justice League is there, and they will die fighting an enemy to protect the Earth. It's just the nature of who they are. That comes with a massive amount of responsibility. And Jessica Cruz being so easily overcome by fear and having to fight with every inch of her life in order to protect the members of her team and the world is simply a responsibility that she's not ready yet. But note this, take note of this. She was the only one who did. She was the only one that saved the world. The rest of the Justice League was totally overcome with fear. Batman and Superman were talking out their problems. Barry Allen was there with her, but Simon Baz was contemplating his problems, and Cyborg was sitting around contemplating his problems. Jessica Cruz was the one who acted to save people. She was the one that acted to save the world. And so ultimately, if there's anyone that's part of the Justice League right now who should be part of that team, it is her. And so the question that I have, I guess at the end of this is, what's Bryan Hitch going to do with her? Maybe it was that Sam Humphries wanted to take her in a direction totally isolated. Maybe it's because, Bryan Hitch wants to, focus on her outside of the Justice League. We don't really know at this point. But what we do know is that at this moment right now, Jessica Cruz has officially left the team. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button, become part of the Rob Corps. And if you guys want to see some more DC Rebirth stuff, then make sure you guys drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think, and I will catch you all later. Peace.